Welcome to the show. Ain't Gonna Hurt Nobody podcast, episode 18.
Voting age.
That's right. So for today's show, we want to get right to it. As you guys know, we love to eat. Joy and I, our pastime is eating. So we wanted to dedicate an episode to just that. But more specifically, we wanted to talk about the restaurant industry, cooking as a whole, and then what it takes to really to make it in that industry. Being able to cook is one thing, but being able to cook and run a business is a whole nother. So in order to help us shed more light on this subject, we brought in two special guests. A beautiful couple who have been married for how many years?
Year and a half?
Yeah. No, it was. Wow.
Smell the love still.
No.
We brought in this duo who is one of the best chef combos we have in the city. First, we have an award-winning pastry chef, Miss Genie Kwon.
Hi, everybody.
And also we have her lovely husband, Mr. Timothy Flores.
How's it going?
Timothy, I use your full government
Yeah,
name.
like Timothy.
It's me, Timothy Ryan Catoriano Flores. That's
All
me.
right,
Yeah.
all right.
Full name.
I'm Genie Jenny Agnes Kwon.
Wow.
Wait, Jenny?
Jenny.
Genie Jenny. Well, my full name is Eugenia.
Wow.
And
that's
now it's
regal.
Genie Jenny.
Yeah, that is regal.
Our parents got real
parents-
creative.
They wanted me to be real cool when I was growing up.
So speaking about your parents and growing up, Jeannie or Eugenia, how about you tell us about yourself, where you're from, and just
Yeah.
kind of some of your restaurant background?
So I was born in New Orleans. My family moved around a lot, but my parents immigrated to Chicago. So that's why I moved back here about 7 years ago. But I started in the industry in Boston. I went to college for science and then transferred to a culinary school. And I haven't looked back. I worked at a place called Flower Bakery and Cafe and for many years. And then I moved to New York City, worked at Levin Madison Park and Nobu. And then once I decided to move to Chicago, I started at the Peninsula and then Boca, GT Fish and Oyster. And then after that, we helped open Oriole. And now we're working on our own spot.
That's exciting. We're going to get more into your own spot that's going to be opening, talk a little bit more about that. But first, Tim, how about you tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, and your cooking resume?
So I grew up right outside of the city in Cicero. Went to college out in Iowa at Wartburg College, and then found myself in the restaurant industry polishing dishes as a summer job while I was back home. I've worked several jobs at GT Fish and Oyster, dish polisher, food runner, service assistant, expediter, and then from there worked at Senza, and then that's where I met, or when Jeannie and I started dating, and then we helped open Oriole together, and then now we're here.
Awesome.
So I guess with the dish polishing, what would be the difference between my dishwashing at home and that?
So there was a dishwasher, and then I just had a drying rag, and I would polish the glassware, the silverware, dry all the plates, and do that stuff. It was a good gig because they'd, bring me food from the kitchen and feed me.
You could just probably listen to music if you wanted. Yeah. Oh, okay.
So I think one of the most interesting things that we just uncovered, you went to school for molecular biology?
Yeah, I was a biochemistry, molecular biology major, and
now you're a pastry chef.
Yes.
So can you guys talk to us a little bit about, your formal training background, if we want to call it that, and then how you actually have gotten into the restaurant business?
Yeah, so I was spending about 20 hours a week in the lab at school, and I realized I'd much rather be cooking and experimenting with food. I did go to a college with a culinary program for the remaining 2 years of my college career, but at the same time when I started is when I got my first job in the industry. Mm-hmm. So it's, I guess, kind of a unique perspective because I had both experiences at the same time. So they were mutually dependent on each other. And it was definitely a great foundation to get into the industry. And I started as a barista at the bakery, and then I moved into the kitchen as a baker.
There's a lot of science involved with baking too, so it's like a cool connection to me.
Right. I think that's why I like it. I don't really like savory cooking that much because it's not as exact, and I'm still an impatient person, so it's frustrating having to wait to see the final product of the pastry. But I like the aspect of experimenting and weighing, and I'm on a calculator in Excel just as much.
Really? Never seen my mama do that.
Get my Excel sheet, baby.
And most is a cup and no lines, no nothing. It was a measuring cup at one point in time. So you guys said that you guys met while working together at GT?
Yes.
Kitchenmeister. Tell us about that.
I was starting as he was leaving, so we didn't overlap too much.
Yeah, it was probably like I think my last 2 weeks is when she was starting.
And he's a very stoic person, so I thought he was kind of a jerk. I was like, this asshole, he doesn't like say hello. Or...
Right, for sure, yeah. And we're both kind of the type of person who just keeps their head down and like works, and so we just didn't really interact very much, you know. I remember 1 or 2 occasions where we actually spoke, and it was just asking you about your desserts or something like that. And I don't think we didn't start dating till like a year later when we met. She came into Senza to eat with a mutual friend, and then
you shot your shot.
Yeah. So
in the DMs.
So it really was. So staging in the restaurant industry is kind of when you go into a place to learn. You could stage as almost a tryout for a job, or you could stage as an internship. And so I contacted Genie to stage with her to learn pastry because I was a savory chef and I wanted to expand my horizons and talk to Genie as well, which was kind of the plan. I guess it worked out.
I never how to make pies.
I never ended up.
Hey girl, let me learn them
with her.
sweets.
Yeah.
You haven't baked a pie since.
Never. Yeah. But yeah, and then we just ended up meeting up. I never staged.
Nice. So everybody who has social media has seen a tasty recipe, and the kind of the way they film those, everybody thinks they can cook, or because of the access to recipes or even the plated and those type of delivery subscription services, people feel like they have some type of culinary chops. Can you talk about what makes, cooking for yourself at home, even if you deliver a delicious meal as your end product for yourself? Can you tell us about what's different working in the restaurant, like the business of it, not just being chefs, but being a chef and working in the business of delivering delicious meals on a consistent basis?
Yes, I think it's funny because I don't necessarily like cooking at home. Our kitchen is set up pretty great because we've been testing a lot of things, but it's completely different when you're in a restaurant setting. You just have the energy of other people. There's it's strange, but I need fear to propel me to get things done at a certain time, and if I don't have that time pressure, I'm not as productive as I want to be. So when I'm in a restaurant setting, there's always just these time increments that you have to meet, and then you have to get everything done before service. So for me, it's a completely different atmosphere.
So the atmosphere really helps drive you versus cooking at home.
For sure.
Sounds like adrenaline plays a big role into what you guys have to deliver there.
And I think there's a different format for how you have to create a dish. At home, if you're making something like, beef stew, and you're going to make it in a pot and throw it in the oven, and you take your beef and you brown it and take that out and then sweat your vegetables and then add it all together and then add your liquids. That's not necessarily how you need to set something up in a restaurant, because you can't have that stew sitting there from whenever you make it and it finishes at 3 till when the guests get there, because it won't be perfect. So you might have to cook your vegetables separate and cook your meat separate and then have everything ready so that when the customer orders it, it's not a very long pickup.
But for when they receive it, they feel like it was prepared all day for them, the way that you did it.
That you do it at home.
Oh,
so there's a lot of steps, and generally it takes a lot longer because you're getting everything to almost like 90% there, so that when the guest gets there, it only takes a couple minutes for them to get a meal that seems like it took all day to make. And
so when you guys mentioned, helping start certain restaurants here in the city and have worked at other ones, did you guys help create the menu? And if so, can you talk about what that process is?
Yeah, definitely. I think this last restaurant that we opened, it was a different format because it was a tasting menu and there was only one menu, and it was about 12 to 15 courses.
What's the tasting menu for those of us that don't know?
So it's a set price, and a lot of times you don't know beforehand what it's going to be, and then you get presented with, it really is 12 to 15 different courses, and they switch out your utensils every time, they clear everything, and it's definitely a beautiful experience service wise too, because of all the front of the house and interaction with all of the employees. But I mean, I love fine dining because you have so much control. And I think my biggest challenge with that menu in particular was creating experiences in small bites so that people could have a broad range of pastries without making them feel overwhelmed by the end of it.
How many pastries, let's say if you're doing, 14, 16 courses, how many pastries are going to play into that?
So I did about four or five of those courses.
Some of them were single bites.
Yeah,
even.
so that's the hard part for me, is creating an experience that makes an impact in one bite. It's great because you know exactly how many people are coming in, and you know what their restrictions are going to be, and you just have enough time to prepare the anticipation of the guests. And I think that's probably the thing that we're going to miss the most with our own place, because we're not going to be doing a tasting menu, and we're going to make it a little more casual.
And I think Genie's part of the menu, the pastries, is probably the most difficult part to make delicious, not because her pastries aren't delicious, but by the time you get to that point in the menu, you're full. Yeah. Whereas the first bite, it's like, I'm hungry. You could give me a chicken nugget and I'd be super happy, like, some barbecue sauce or whatever. But when you're at that point in the menu, and you get to desserts, sometimes they could be extremely overwhelming. You get to a chocolate thing or something sweet. So that was what Genie did really well, is balance that part of the menu and excite your taste buds again and bring it back, and then say, wow, like, I'm hungry again for desserts,
Yeah.
Because it would just be interesting, like, how would you decide what to pick? Because I'm sure you tested out so many different ones. It's like, how did you decide which one would go?
Right. I think there was definitely a format to how I started to test things. There was, a palate cleanser after all of the savory food to kind of just clean your palate. And so it would always be light, usually something watery. And then it would go into maybe something that's fruit-based, and then you can do something a little bit richer after that. And then I'd always finish with a series of small minierdis or the one-bite desserts. And then the last thing that we made was a mini pie for people to take home after.
Oh, wow.
And I think that was just a nice touch for somebody to be able to remember the experience maybe the next day, or later that night, whenever they decide to eat it.
Sometimes at the table, people would just open it up and go for that extra dessert.
I could see based on the little goodies you've left. So can you talk a little bit about, in terms of having to make a dish, working with suppliers to make sure you can get the same consistent quality of ingredients?
I mean, we have some great purveyors.
Usually it starts with a single product for me. Say somebody brings in this salmon from Norway or something like that, or that's just an example. And I'll take that and maybe grill it or do something to it, and then figure out, like, this is awesome. I don't really need to do too much to this because it's perfect. And so that's kind of the starting point for a lot of dishes that I create, is like finding something that's pretty perfect to start with, and then it makes the dish a lot easier to assemble.
But how do you feel, like, Tim, as, like, because you do the savory meals, and I love, like, cooking savory stuff, has changes in the environment, like, change the consistency of products you receive in any way?
I think we see it in the produce right now. I think I've heard last year was one of the worst growing seasons here in the Midwest.
2019.
For farmers. I think in particular because I think it got warm in the spring, and then there was a ton of rain, and then it dropped into freezing temperatures. And you really notice that at the farmer's market. If you've gone previous years, you see like a lot of really good produce. The strawberries are great, the berries are great. And then when we went last year, it was like, I think some of the farmers were struggling a little bit, which is sad. And I think that's a problem in the Midwest, is you have such a short growing season. Because if you go south or you go to California and you go to the farmers markets there's a huge difference in the not only quality but the variety. And so when you have a bad growing season, it really affects all that stuff. And so sourcing ingredients is becoming difficult in the Midwest. But I mean, it's helpful now. You could get ingredients from pretty much anywhere, and I mean, it's nice when we can get stuff locally. there's a lot of farms that we use that are really great here.
Absolutely. I want to rewind a little bit, and I think before we got on air, we were having a good conversation. We taught Genie a little bit about your background in terms of starting off, as a in the field of science and then moving over to cooking. Tim, can we spend a little bit of time and talk about your entry into the restaurant biz?
Before I went to college, I actually thought about going to culinary school, and then I spoke to my sister about it, and she was like, "Yeah, that's not very practical. How many chefs are there, in the city?" And I kind of listened to her, and I think I had an interest in food before I went to college. My mom's a really great cook. One of my sisters is a really great cook. Our family gatherings are all surrounded by or revolve around food. So whenever we meet up, it's where are we going to go for lunch? And then we're thinking about what we're going to eat for dinner, if we're spending the day together. But when I decided to go to college, I didn't think it was practical, so I went for nursing, which was like my first semester. I was like, this is crazy. I'm not, I felt like that's what I should do. I don't know, because maybe I'm Filipino or something like that, and it felt like the right thing to do. But as soon as I took that first Bio 101 class, it was just like, I can't do this. This is like another language for me. I don't understand what's going on. So then I went into some other fields and then actually graduated with a communication design degree. But as I was in college, a buddy of mine, I was back home. I was actually in Chinatown eating, and he texted me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to make $50 tonight?" I'm like, sure. He's like, "Okay, meet me at GT. You're going to be polishing dishes." So I started polishing dishes, and then they were like, "Do you want to come back next weekend?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, that's fine." And then they asked me if I wanted to be a food runner. And I kind of fell in love with the restaurant industry from that point, seeing all the different moving parts, the cooks interacting with the chefs, running food to tables, and seeing how guests were enjoying the food and how food was being created in the background for prep and all that stuff. And so I asked if I could cook the next summer I came back from school. And then so I took a job cooking and took my first semester off. So I actually cooked for about 6 months there. And very early on to that point in my career, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. Even while I was in college, I decided pretty much at that point, like, I want to be a chef and I want to open a restaurant.
So you never went to culinary school?
No, I did not. Yeah.
Awesome. So when somebody's a chef, is that a certain designation that you need to do, or is it a title is it a self-appointed title, or how does somebody become a chef versus a cook?
And then the sous chef, I've heard that.
So executive chef generally is the top guy. It's the boss who does all the office stuff, restaurant stuff, menu stuff. And then next to him is the chef de cuisine, who is traditionally in charge of menu development. And then there's sous chefs who are like their assistants. And then there are chef de parties or cooks who are next in line. And then obviously the pastry chef is up there as well. But that's generally the kind of system with how restaurants work.
Joy and I, when we go to eat, when we first started dating, our thing was going to Guy Fieri's Diners, Drive-In, and Dives menu.
Yeah,
trying to figure
like
out
online, yeah.
Or if we went to another city, like, Triple D, where are we going?
Let me get this pork chop sandwich. It looks delicious.
They didn't even take the bone out. So, but when you think about it now, right, I didn't know what a Michelin star, a Bib Gourmand, or any of these kind of awards, or even like Yelp or Eater saying top restaurants in the city. That wasn't really a thing, right? It was, you kind of had a guide. Now everything that everybody does, it's so Instagram driven and Instagram friendly, and food photography and food porn. How do you guys feel that has driven the industry in a good or bad way?
I personally think that it's done an incredible amount for the industry. It's at a point where what has helped us is now kind of causing its demise almost, but you need it now. You need it. It's part of everyday PR. It's part of promoting yourself, and even when we post things, we haven't been very good on Instagram lately, but whenever we do, nothing garners more attention or likes than food. And so it's definitely become a big part of it, but at the same time, you kind of have to take things for a grain of salt too, because what that one picture is showing you could have taken all day to make that one perfect thing, and I'm more interested in how you're making hundreds of things consistently. So it's something that I definitely use for research and education and entertainment purposes, but at the same time, it doesn't really dictate what I'm making myself or what I'm testing.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's a food craze now, I think. I think that's a big form of entertainment now. You know, instead of going bowling or to the movies, you're trying to figure out what restaurant you're going to go to. And because of that, there's a huge rush of restaurant openings. And because of that, restaurant closings. So as fast as restaurants are opening, restaurants are closing now, which is kind of crazy because it's just like a race to get open, I think, for a lot of people.
I feel that same way, right? I worked in the West Loop for the last 5 years, and I feel like outside of the restaurants that get a ton of hype, you know, that you more or less get that tourist traffic in addition, you know, because there's no real foot traffic in the West Loop here in Chicago, right? You have a little bit of that, but you don't have just that lunch crowd. Like, you can't go to Al Cheval every day for lunch. You can't drop $18 every day for lunch. So you're relying on that tourist traffic. So the amount of restaurants I've seen just open and disappear within 18 months is unbelievable. Now this food hall craze that's sweeping everywhere. How do you guys feel about that? Because I know the second one that opened in the West Loop, and the name escapes me, not Paladin Road, but the other one that just, you know the one I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Pink Salt
was in there.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the
But they were
hall.
open and closed in 6 months, and the food was delicious, the service was delicious, and it's just gone. Like
Right.
that has to be that's a trippy thing for me to have to do. On paper you're doing everything right, but then you're just gone, and probably thousands of dollars just gone. Like, I don't,
Right.
you know, it's hard for me to process like staying in a business like this.
I think it's hard because the West Loop is so saturated for anything at this point, but food halls in particular, we were actually approached to do a couple of them, and they what they do is you can go into this stall, and then a percentage of your gross sales goes towards everything. Basically, the maintenance, you're not paying rent, it's all included essentially. And I think if you're not doing the traffic there, it's just impossible. But it's at the same time, it's a great place to kind of get your start and your footing if you don't have a brick and mortar location. So we've been to Time Out quite a bit recently, and there's you know, a lot of our friends are in there, and it seems like they're busy all the time, so hopefully they're doing well. In the West Loop especially, I think the food halls are great for the people that are in there, just because the rent in the West Loop is so astronomical that I can't fathom how people are affording to pay these rents. And so when you have something built in like that, where you can just have a portion of your sales going to cover all of that stuff, it's definitely advantageous for people that are up and coming.
Cool. So you guys definitely are not up and coming, but we know what is up and coming. You guys, you know, have a restaurant concept that you're working on. The ink isn't dried on anything, so we're not going to jinx anything and go into detail about, you know, name, location, etc. But can you talk a little bit about your journeys from obviously coming from dish polisher and science nerd to now opening up, you know, what's most likely going to be an award-winning restaurant? And
I think that was a compliment. Yeah.
No, maybe. But can we talk a little bit about what that, you know, the decision to go out on your own, you know, before we got on here, you spoke about like you pretty much worked for minimum wage for several years, right? So now you guys are going out doing this, like, why?
Oh, we're masochists, and
yeah, definitely.
But we have dreams and goals, and it's funny because I actually made the most money I've ever made as a cook at my first job. And that was, you know, the best boss I ever had. And she created a culture that I think it kind of ruined me, because afterwards I was always searching for that. And I definitely found it here and there, but they were fewer and far between. And so I think after, you know, I've been cooking for 15 years, and now we've just gotten to a point where we reached a ceiling, and how do you go further? And this was the only way that we can do that.
Yeah.
and we want to create that culture and be a part of the change that we want to see.
Yeah. And I think fundamentally we both love cooking for people and giving food to people. Like if you come over our place, there won't ever be a time where we don't ask you if you want something to drink or something to eat, you know. And it's great, and it's amazing that we can do that as a career. And like when we left our last place to start this, I think our main goal is just we want to create an atmosphere where we want to work and where we could put out the food that we like. And it's like coming into our home, you know, like this entire time we haven't been, we've been like searching for restaurant locations and doing this whole thing. We have people over, and I cook for people, you know, testing recipes while doing so, you know. So like this summer we threw a bunch of barbecues, had people over with certain things we're working on.
What?
This summer, it's coming up.
Yeah.
It's coming.
It's coming, yeah.
You know, people are always asking about baking and how it's, you know, you wake up so early and how it's kind of isolating because you're up before everybody else and you're alone. And I appreciate that aspect of it. But the only reason I think we cook is to cook for people.
Yeah.
It's like we don't really cook for ourselves in the way that
I mean,
we
I
cook
make
for other
myself like
people.
scrambled eggs and rice on a regular basis and like chili mac and really simple stuff. But when it's for other people, that's when I like actually cook, and we don't eat when that's the like we're not doing any of the eating, you know. It's like for other people. It's funny how that works because we're just like slaving away all day, and then when it comes time to eat, we're like not hungry.
What he's not telling you people is that the chili mac has cheese that was harvested from the goat udders of a goat that lives in the Pyrenees mountain that only produces 3 gallons of milk a year. Yeah. So can you tell us more about the restaurant concept?
Yeah.
Is that allowed? Is that legal?
Yeah. So we're doing a bakery cafe. That's sort of Genie's part in the morning. And then at night it will flip to a contemporary Filipino restaurant, which is when we first left Oriole, I think our concept was very different. I think I wanted to do a tasting menu with some kind of hints of like Filipino cuisine. And then I started thinking about what I wanted to eat all the time, and it wasn't a tasting menu. You know, like where we go on a regular basis. I love cooking in fine dining restaurants. I love doing the tasting menu thing. I love having control of everything. But when it came down to it, we were like, where do we want to eat? And that's how our concept evolved. And what did we grow up doing and grow up eating? And that was Filipino food for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was also a way for us to also be able to work together and bring our concepts together, because there's always just kind of been this plateau as a pastry chef, and I started out as a baker, and I remember so vividly that at my first job there were people that would come in every single morning for 10 years and sit at the one communal table at the bakery. And it's always just stuck with me, and I always wanted to have a place where people could come in multiple times. And as much as we love fine dining and that world, as a cook, we would try and experiment, and it's very important to go out and eat and experience other restaurants. But how many times were we going out to eat restaurants? It's like, it's hard to justify back then spending a week's paycheck on one meal. And I think that's also what we tried to bring to the table at our last job was, if somebody's going to spend this money, we want them to have the best experience that we can possibly provide to them. And fundamentally, of course, it's about delicious food, but overall it's about the hospitality and the experience that you're having. And so I think just being able to bring those details into a more casual restaurant hopefully is going to help us succeed.
Oh, I have a 2-part question. My first question is, like, what is something that the everyday person is not gonna know, like, about what, like, the grind that you go through as like a pastry chef and as a chef that Tim does, or just like working in a restaurant? Like, I know there's a lot of assumptions that people have and they think they know, but it's just like, what's that behind the scenes type thing that we wouldn't know as just a average customer?
I think that Specifically, a good example is in fine dining. We're trying to figure out as much information about you as possible before you come in. We take notes for every time that you dine and make comments about whether or not you're left-handed, what type of water you like to drink, some of your favorite dishes, and so I think that's part of the reason why fine dining restaurants are able to provide that experience, is because they're Googling you. They might be looking at your Instagram or Facebook and trying to get some sort of understanding of what you might want to expect out of this experience. And so I think people are usually surprised by that fact the most.
Yeah.
Sure. Kind of stalker-ish.
Yeah, right. Like if I notice you don't eat the eggplant on the plate, and like you might be a regular customer, we'll put that down, and we're like, well, I know that they don't like eggplant, so we won't send that to them. If we wanted to, send you something or whatever.
That's nice. I guess I don't go to fine dining.
Yeah, for sure. Like plates come back and you see things that guests see, and you're like, oh, they avoided that. Why is that not working? Is it consistently coming back that way? If that's the case, then something's wrong with that. And we're always looking towards like things to make something better. Like, oh, well, they ate that part too fast and it wasn't all incorporated. So can we process the vegetable that was on the side in a different way so they eat it all together? So it's much more eatable. Like you give somebody a piece of meat and then something like mashed potatoes on the side. Mm-hmm. You have to cut the steak. The mashed potatoes you kind of just spoon into your mouth. How can I make that dish kind of come together? I mean, that's like a pretty rough example, but I like dishes where when you put a spoon in there, you get everything in one bite. And you have to tailor dishes so that people eat it a certain way.
So just understanding like the labor of love that goes into being a chef. Can you talk a little bit about, we want to get to two things: the economics of working in the kitchen versus working front of house, and then what advice would you give people who want to get into the culinary industry? You
definitely have to love it. It's an artistic trade. I made minimum wage most of my career, and the only thing that I've ever wanted to do in life is make things for people, whether it's food or not. But I think there's something to be said about how inclusive food is, and how much more gratifying it is to get to know somebody to the point where you can make something for them and know that they're going to love it. And so it's hard because the profit margins are tight and labor cost is going up and food cost is going up. And so it's not necessarily maybe the best investment in terms of return on investment, but it's something that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And what better way to do it than into a place where we can create a culture that's inclusive and create experiences that are still elevated but casual.
So speaking to that end, when you talk about that, right, you both have different paths that you use to get to the same place that you're at now. So how would you guys advise somebody who wants to get into the culinary industry? What would you advise them?
I think it's a little bit easier now just because there's so many restaurants. The only advice I can give is to get in there, be willing to learn, be willing to go in and stage, and just learn how each environment does what they do, because it's going to be different everywhere. I can't really encourage people to go to culinary school or not. I did, and I had a great experience, but I can understand why people wouldn't because of the financial burden of it when you're going out into a field where you're not making a lot of money. But I can definitely see it both ways. I just think that people need to be willing and open to adapt to how different restaurants want to do the thing that they do that makes them successful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, one thing I didn't think about was paying back my student loans after college. And so when I started working in restaurants, you're making minimum wage and you're kind of drowning in your student loans, and it's difficult. I think even if you're not doing that, it's difficult to make a living as a cook. So you have to really love it. You have to make the sacrifice and kind of like see the finish line, see where you want to be in this industry and if it's worth it. Because when I graduated, I lived at home for a while, because to make that career work. And I think when Genie was cooking in New York, she probably lived in a closet, with a couple roommates, just to make things work, and probably had to commute, an hour plus to get to work. in Manhattan somewhere. So I mean, the financial burden is tough, especially the hours considered. Even at my first cooking job, I was probably working 60 hours a week, and that's a lot for the regular Monday through Friday 9 to 5.
Absolutely.
And yeah, right. And now with like opening a restaurant, like we'll be pushing 100. I mean, when we work 5 days, we're probably doing 70, 80 hours a week, so it's a lot of work and little pay, and that's why we do it because we love it, but it is tough, especially graduating from college and being a young person and being like, well, I could do something else that makes more money and has benefits.
Talk about the benefits. Talk about that and not having benefits, what that means in the restaurant biz.
I think the biggest thing for us is how do we get everybody affordable health care. I think that there's definitely a shift. The dynamic is shifting in terms of getting a better workplace environment and treating people better. And, kitchens used to be really abusive, and some still are, but there's definitely a shift that we're seeing. And, we want to be able to provide health care because that's just something that cooks always had to worry about. They couldn't get sick. They couldn't go to the doctor. Even when they were sick, they had to go to work because they couldn't afford otherwise. And that's one of our biggest challenges is how do we make it more fair? How do we make the changes that we want to see without being hypocrites? And it's definitely something that we're still working through. But that's our ultimate goal.
I would ask the second part of my earlier question. I was curious, like, what is your best and worst eating experience? Or like, even if like, because I like to cook too, and I know it's like times where you're like, dang, I forgot this and it was just horrible, but like, what's your best and worst experiences?
That's a tough one.
Wow.
There's a
I
lot.
could talk about my best, and it's really simple things. Like, it wasn't in some fine dining restaurant. I think one experience that sticks out to me is I went to Spain when I was in college with a buddy of mine, and there was a language barrier at most restaurants, and some people are willing to communicate with you and some people aren't. And we went into this one place that looked like it was good, and you could see the menu, and there was like some fried seafood stuff, and you order kind of by the kilo or whatever. And we went in, and me and my buddy just ordered like the fried squid and the shrimp and the sardines and some fried, some French fries and whatever. And the lady was like, no. That's not, that's, and she wasn't speaking English. She was just kind of saying no, and that's not how you do it. It's like, order one thing and then drink and then order another thing. And that's kind of like the culture is to take your time there in Spain. And so, whereas here we're like, we order everything, we just eat all at once, and they kind of sit and eat, and they won't bring you the check until you ask for it and you take your time. And so she kind of tailored this experience to us and showed us what to order and how to eat, and was just super caring. And we didn't speak the same language, but we understood each other, and that like meant a lot. That's the experience that we kind of want to create, and the experience that I really look for is just being nice to people. Like, just say hi, how you doing? I don't ask for a lot, but that was one of the best experiences I've had, because they're just the overall experience, and the food was great. Super fresh seafood, simply like fried, and that's it.
Awesome.
I'd have to think about my worst. That's a tough one.
I definitely have bad cooking experiences where the end product doesn't turn out the way I wanted to, and I get really discouraged. But then it's, I guess, all that more rewarding when you finally get to that point where you're happy with something. I've definitely had some bad meals, for sure. We've had amazing ones, and in some of them anywhere from fine dining to small mom and pop places. I guess the only most recent one I can think of is that we tell everybody, but we drove to Vegas to get married.
From Chicago?
From Chicago. And
I could have did it on 35th
You are not ordained.
We were trying to find Elvis and
try to rip us off, and then we just ended up getting married by this guy named Kyle or something like that. And it was a very sterile environment. Looked like a dentist's office, which was really strange.
But on the way there, we stopped in Denver. We went to this place called Mercantile, and they had this braised short rib sandwich with Gruyere fondue and arugula. And it's like the simplest sandwich I'll ever order. But I was like, this is the best sandwich I've ever eaten in my life.
Yeah.
It sounded complicated.
It sounded good. Yeah.
We finished in LA, and then we were going to drive back through the Southwest, through Arizona and stuff. And then we decided to go back through Denver just to eat that sandwich again.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Well, we're coming up on time, so before we get out of here, a couple of things. We need to know your guys' top 5 restaurants to recommend to people. One, we'll break it down, fine dining, because I think a lot of us still don't know what fine dining is. I thought just if you had linen, that qualifies you.
If you got it on Groupon, it's probably not fine dining.
And then just 5 places you guys love to send people. So just want to get some restaurant recommendations out there.
For sure. I think Oriole is still an incredibly beautiful experience for the menu and the service for fine dining.
It's one of the best fine dining meals you could get in the country, I believe. You know, and we've been around. And it's kind of one of those things where you look at it and you say, like, well, it costs a lot. But it's a one place where you can kind of, fine dining experiences, it's like, you can go there and it's like kind of like taking a vacation somewhere, or like you could spend that money one time that year, and it's like, wow, that was something special, you know. And that's definitely for us. On the other end of the spectrum, casually, we live this place called Mary's Taqueria in Pilsen, and you have to order the creamy green salsa with the chips. It's like one of my top 5 condiments of all time. Let's see, JJ Thai street food is really good over on Chicago and Ashland. They do more northern style Thai, so you won't get like your pad Thai and things like that, pad see there, but they do a lot of like really good grilled meats with like herbs and sauces, and it's really delicious. There's an old school Italian place in Cicero called Freddy's Pizzeria. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, that place is awesome. They put it on paper plates and you just say when, and then they weigh the food, and they have like it's a tiny pizza, Italian grocery gelato. Store. It's like a couple owns it, and that's a really awesome spot. Las Gorditas de Don Angel in Cicero is like a really overlooked gordita place there. Tiny. Where they do really good gorditas, and then they do this, it's an unusual burrito. It's called a burrito de deshebrada. And it's like this little flour tortilla with braised beef rolled up, and then they press it on the griddle, and it's like one of the best things. It's like super satisfying. Yeah. We gotta take you on a Cicero food crawl. Yeah.
For sure. What are we doing after this? Let's go. Tell us, is your restaurant considered fine dining, the one that you guys are opening, or is it considered, what is that considered?
It's definitely going to be more casual. I mean, casual, yeah. I think our point with going more casual and intentionally going more casual is that our main thing is we want to create a place where we want to go and where people can go multiple times a week. And so that naturally we have to go away from the fine dining aspects. Absolutely. But at the same time, we still are trying to keep those standards with the food. And so whereas like it might be an a la carte menu, you're still going to have those aspects where there's a lot of attention to detail and consistency in the food, and it will be somewhere in between. Oh, wow. Well, this might be our first 2-part episode because we plan on doing an episode from your restaurant once it's opening. Absolutely.
I plan on eating a lot of food, so I'll probably do a lot less talking. Nick and I will be definitely maxing in the corner. So, Joy, you're going to have to put that one on your back and just go for it. So
I like to take my food home and save it and then eat it. Yeah.
Introduce you to some Filipino dishes and stuff. I think that's a big goal, is like popularizing Filipino food. Oh, you know, I don't think there's enough Filipino restaurants.
I'll put on a rice shirt and everything. I'll do the dance and everything. So we like to end every show with a little segment called Things We Wish We Would Have Known. The goal is just to tell our younger self something that we all know now. So it could be anything from a life lesson to advice that you've actually given somebody recently, to just like, you know what, I fucked this up, but had I known this, I probably wouldn't have fucked it up as bad. So
okay, well, something that I wish I would have known, or something that I'm still learning, is that with your relationships in life, if something's going wrong or if it's not going the way you want, you can't just blame the other person. You have to be like, if you feel that you're like either your friend relationship, marriage relationship, work relationships, if you feel like they're going awry, I always was a person that blamed the other person, like this is what they need to fix, like being their life coach. Like if they would do this, everything would be cool. But then in hindsight, as I get older, I realize like I'm probably the problem. And if if these relationships aren't good or unhealthy, maybe I'm unhealthy in some way. And I think that is something that I wish I would have known, and I'm still learning. That's my message.
It's a good one, and I think I'll build off of that one. Just, sitting with you guys for like the last 2 hours or so, just understanding that, finding your passion and following that is more important. Just the last year and a half has been a lot of transition for enjoying myself, and then just understanding that, we haven't necessarily followed our passion. We have followed money, we have chased opportunity, we have relocated because of opportunity, and we've had good times. But whether it's our passion or something that we really owned or controlled our destiny, wasn't necessarily there. So just understanding that finding your passion and making that something that you can really pursue, matters just as much as money, because that money can come and go, but the passion, you can make that whatever you want. And that's what I got.
So this one, I might be stealing Tim's actually, because he would always tell me about one of his old wrestling coaches and how his motto was, just do it anyway. And it's like people are always looking for these motivational things or these big lessons, and I think it's such a good one because sure, everybody is going to love the highs of a job or a career, but there's also things that we do every day that we don't want to be doing, you know what I mean? And you just have to do it anyway. And that's it. It's because you do these things and not in spite of them that you get to where you want to be later on. And I think it's huge. And just knowing that if you put your head down and do the work, like you're going to get to where you want to be if you make those goals.
Awesome.
The thing I would tell my younger self is just to not be as hard on yourself with certain things and making the wrong choices, because I'm just constantly like, I shouldn't have done that, I should have done this, and it would have put me in a better position later in life. And I think especially like going to college and then deciding I wanted to go into the restaurant industry was really hard, because then I was like really loving what I was doing but not getting paid a lot, and then I was paying student loans and stuff, and I was like, man, this was just giving me a lot of stress. And I was like, I shouldn't have gone to school for that. I should have done this and blah, blah, blah. And I think as much as it would have been smart to maybe just start working in restaurants or go to culinary school, like I don't think I would have ended up here if I took that route. You know, I think if I maybe would have gone to culinary school and got an associate's degree locally, or I went to work at a restaurant, I don't think I would have necessarily had the same experience and the same path to get to where I'm at now. And so I think it just to be not as hard on myself and just be like, things happen for a reason, and no matter what, you're going to get to where you need to be in the end, you know. And yeah, that's probably,
you know, I had a similar one not too long ago, because without the path you took, you wouldn't have met your wife, right? Had you not started off there, like when you came across each other. So just, you know, whether you're religious or not, like you were where you were supposed to be when you were supposed to be there.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we wish you guys all the best and opening
Yeah,
the
we do.
restaurant.
Thank you so much.
And I will volunteer. I am an early riser. If you need me to bake yeast or something,
Bake
I will
yeast.
do it.
You just fired yourself.
We'll take you up on that.
we can't wait to have you in.
Well, Tim, Genie, thank you guys so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for our baked goods, and keep an eye out on our Instagram page to find out more about their grand opening when it happens.
Yeah.
Ain't Gonna Hurt Nobody podcast, episode 18. We out.
We out. Peace.
Yeah.